Welcome to episode 108 of the GTO on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 20 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel Sag. Let's get started. I did miss being on the podcast last week, but I was in Paris. I'll talk a little bit more about that during the podcast, but my first topic is around Nokia and their partnership with the US Air Force to test spectrum interference between military radar systems and 5G networks, in particular, its mid-band spectrum. So what are the implications? And, Anshel, you and I have been covering all of the contention and concern around altimeters and 5G and that sort of thing in exclusion zones. And so this is sort of a follow-on, from my perspective to that. Specifically, what Nokia and the Air Force are trying to determine is, can military radar coexist with 5G networks that operate in the 3.1 to 3.45 gigahertz range of spectrum? And the military is also leveraging Nokia's RAN intelligent controller, which is referred to commonly as a RIC. And this is really going to pave the way for further military installations of 5G networks. We've talked about applications with the Marine Corps for transportation and logistics, and I believe you covered another military use case as well. And so I just think this will further the effort to make sure that whatever is done from a 5G perspective doesn't interfere with critical military radar instrumentation. And this covers land, air, and sea radars, as well as air defense systems. So this is pretty critical just to ensure that there's no blowback with respect to military operations. But I'm wondering if you have any input.
I did not see this specific one with the US Air Force and Nokia.
Yeah.
But it does make sense to want to make sure that there's no interference. What I did think was interesting, specifically around interference issues with 5G, was that OneWeb came out a couple days ago saying that they agree with SpaceX's assessment that there is potential interference to 5G in 12 gigahertz, which we know SpaceX has been very vehement against.
Yeah.
So it looks like the satellite, LEO guys are starting to gang up together against 12 gigahertz 5G. But on this topic, I don't have any specific insights or thoughts.
Gotcha. No, that's cool. Well, let's go to your first topic. And I saw this news as well, but you want to talk a little bit about Verizon's new 5G Welcome Unlimited plan. And it's unlimited, but it's lacking something pretty critical.
Yeah, so it is their new plan. It's $65 plan for one user, which is really not actually that great of a deal. But if you get up to 4 users, it's actually $30 a month, which I think works great for a lot of families. I think the big issue with this plan is it doesn't include 5G ultra wideband, which they call UWB. And the problem is that the way Verizon has segmented out their 5G offerings is they've got 5G nationwide here, and then they've got 5G UWB, which encapsulates both millimeter wave and midband. So the real 5G network with the performance that you would expect from 5G is gated away from these users, and they can only basically use 5G low band and DSS, and they're realistically only going to be getting LTE-like experiences. So there really isn't much of a benefit to them to upgrade from 4G or even upgrade their devices. So I don't really know what it accomplishes other than moving more people to 5G. There is a significant kind of promotion where I think they give like $240 per line to switch in the form of a gift card. So there are some monetary benefits to making this switch, but in general, experientially, if you're already a Verizon customer, you probably won't see any difference. And if you're switching from another carrier to Verizon, there is a possibility that you could have a lesser experience if you were already on midband on AT&T or T-Mobile. So I don't think it's a great plan. When I first talked about this plan, and I thought about it, I thought it was a great deal because of the $30 a line. But then I didn't know that it was lacking UWB. which changes my perspective on this deal considerably. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no. So from my perspective, I mean, this is obviously an attempt for Verizon to churn some of its competitors' customers over. And there's certainly a benefit to migrate people, onto 5G, even if it's like at the very kind of low band, kind of spectrum position there. But I'm wondering if there is any plan on Verizon's part to, bring people over with a super cheap plan, because I mean, $30 for a tier 1 postpaid plan is pretty aggressive and pretty compelling. And I believe, to your point, a lot of customers may not be cognizant of the fact that they're not going to get, the true benefit of the ultra wideband service that Verizon's been focused on. And there could also be sort of a scheme. I don't want to call it a scheme. It sounds pretty nefarious, but there could be a plan to bring people in sort of at the low end, and then, do some sort of, promotional, kind of time period on this particular plan, and then try to upsell them, into a higher tiered plan. But, time will tell with that. We've talked about, Verizon's FWA service. I don't think we did that on a podcast, but I think you and I were trading some tweets on that. It was, it's again, that FWA service is pretty inexpensive if you have a line of mobile service, but the performance is terrible. So, it just seems like, this could be like a money grab sort of strategy on Verizon's part to bring subs over, and then maybe try to upsell them in the future. But who knows? Time will tell. But let me move to my second topic. And I talked about Paris briefly as we got started. And I thank Diana for standing in for me last week on the podcast, since I was 8 or 9 hours, time different from the two of you. And I was actually at the LoRaWAN World Expo in Paris, chairing a panel on smart cities. And I got to spend time with the Alliance. I've spent time with the LoRaWAN Alliance over the years. Now, from my perspective, they're really sort of hitting their critical mass after several years. I think it's definitely also helped that Sigfox has died a very slow death. And Sigfox was really the competing technology with LoRa. And if our viewers and listeners aren't familiar with LoRa, it is an IoT connectivity platform. Semtech provides the silicon, and it's really designed for very low power, low bandwidth applications. And so in one of the media sessions, I asked, the Alliance director, as well as their marketing lead, how they felt, it was positioned via 5G. And they really felt like, for very specific applications with IoT that are, again, very low power and also very low bandwidth, that they felt that LoRa was a great solution. And actually, I walked the expo and I spent some time in several of the booths. And, and for applications such as, power metering and that sort of thing, I think LoRa could serve a great purpose. And there are also a lot of things that the LoRaWAN Alliance are focused on to help drive sustainability goals. Actually, on my panel, it was a great kind of cross section of use cases. So we had someone that was talking to LoRaWAN applications in Cary, North Carolina. Another panelist was talking about applications in Australia. And the third is talking about applications in Germany. And they ranged anywhere from sort of, in North Carolina, it was like outfitting a brand new park with a lot of IoT sensors to do a lot of interesting things, such as monitoring noise and concerts there. I know in my hometown of Austin, Texas, if residents are close to a music venue and they want to complain about the noise, they have to get their smartphones out and they have to use what's called a 311 app to report that. And so in North Carolina, they're using sensors to measure sound and that sort of thing, and to manage lighting, and that was interesting. And then in Australia, the use cases were around water conservation and management. And what's really interesting, this was in Queensland, you don't have traditional water systems. So a lot of residents actually have, little miniature cisterns or water tanks, probably not miniature, they're quite large for their homes. And those have to be filled constantly for, for obvious reasons, because there's no well water. And they were talking about how LoRaWAN is being used, the sensors are being used so that, it can signal to the replenishment water company to roll a truck with water when it's needed, versus having to roll a truck to do a physical inspection. So obviously, there's definitely cost savings there, and kind of mitigating truck rolls and that sort of thing. And then in Germany, the applications were very manufacturing oriented, that didn't require, low latency or fast throughput and that sort of thing. So, my takeaway was Sigfox's demise really kind of leaves LoRaWAN as sort of the de facto IoT connectivity platform for low bandwidth and low power. And it is a purpose-built network. Certainly the mobile network operators such as T-Mobile, and I have talked about T-Mobile and Deutsche Telekom and the TIoT initiative, they're going to monetize their investment in 5G, to do things like IoT. But I think LoRaWAN can coexist. Time will tell the momentum that it drives, but I sort of walked away with a different perspective, having spent about a week there. So I don't know if you have any thoughts, but would love to hear them if you do.
I don't have any thoughts. I think if you're going to talk about IoT proprietary standards, I think we can say that LoRaWAN won.
Yeah.
Right, against Sigfox. But I think ultimately right now, LoRaWAN is going to be one of those things where, it's going to exist for a long time. And I think the model of a lot of the industries that they work with will benefit from that. However, I do think there will be a lot of competition from 5G, especially massive IoT.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be very interesting to see how LoRaWAN can fit into that, or doesn't. But I think long term, it would be best for everyone if LoRaWAN were to be wound into the 3GPP standard somehow to allow for it to be part of the standard, and for it to be just to improve IoT in general. And I don't know if you heard anything about that at the show, but I'm always curious about LoRaWAN and how proprietary it will always be.
Yeah, no discussion around any sort of intersection with 3GPP and LTE and 5G, but that is that's actually a very interesting consideration. So something that I can take back to that team and dive into further for sure. But let's talk about your second topic. And Ericsson announced earnings, and you want to provide a recap on that.
Yes. So Ericsson reported earnings, and their stock tumbled almost 10%. It's actually this earnings was came out I think yesterday, or actually even today, and they reported that they missed on net income. So they missed on, and they also their margin also fell, and they basically said that their kind of costs to doing things has gone up, which doesn't really surprise anybody, I think. But even with analysts, projections, I think they still missed the analyst targets. But what's interesting is they said that they remain committed to reaching their long-term target of an EBITDA margin, including restructuring charges of 15 to 18%, no later than in 2 to 3 years. So there's very much a long-term horizon for Ericsson's profitability. But the thing to consider is that they still have a fairly decent growth margin, gross margin, and that they, as a company, they've been having a difficult time this last year. I think ever since their stock peaked in April of 2021 at about $14, they've kind of been sliding downhill since. And I don't think it's really fair for their stock to have slid that much, considering how much 5G buildouts are happening. But I think that it just comes down to the overall makeup of a company, and that 5G itself is not everything for the company, and that there's going to be a lot more build outs out there, and Ericsson isn't alone. They have competition from Nokia and Samsung, and I think that they have a long road ahead of them in terms of turning things around and making sure that the company you know doesn't get embroiled in lawsuits about bribery and things like that. So
Right.
it's always a challenging thing when a company that's a technological leader struggles on their share price. But I think overall Ericsson is still a pretty strong company, and I think they have a pretty good horizon for them down the road as 5G continues to build out. And I mean, there's still so many 5G networks to build out that I think they still have a lot of opportunities. But to their point, costs have gone up.
Yeah, and that's no surprise. I mean, we're seeing inflation around the globe, and we won't get into the details of that. But I'm also bullish on Ericsson's long-term prospects as well. We've talked about their acquisition of Cradlepoint and how they're integrating that into an enterprise business unit. I stay pretty close to Ericsson. I know that they recently went through a reorg. That's public information. That's nothing that's confidential. And they're really kind of getting their ducks in a line to really go at the enterprise pretty hard. Cradlepoint's enjoyed a great install base there, and private networking is a tremendous opportunity. So as they sort of unify that strategy and they go at the enterprise market, I think that presents them with some significant upside. Cradlepoint has been in the private cellular networking category for some time, and they've got quite a amount of momentum behind them. We've talked about Nokia Enterprise in the past. They've sort of been leading the pack, but I really do believe once the integration is fully realized and we start seeing the fruits of that there'll be some upside there. And to your point, Ericsson has also had some black eyes in the press with some of the news about the bribery and that sort of thing. So we don't want to belabor that. And I think a lot of that is affecting the current stock price, but we're not financial analysts. We are both industry analysts. But I do believe that there is tremendous upside for them in the future, especially with the Cradlepoint acquisition. So, but we'll continue to monitor that and report back as things materialize. But let me move to my third and final topic. I'm also going to talk about Ericsson. It came out that Ericsson, Qualcomm, and Thales, they're a French company. Thales has actually been, very focused on, GPS mapping and that sort of thing. They market a lot of different both consumer and commercial grade products with respect to navigation, but they're all three coming together to test 5G deployment through satellites. And so, what's the impact, longer term? But just a little bit of detail behind this. So, following the 3GPP approval for satellite-driven 5G non-terrestrial networks (NTN), their goal is to use satellite infrastructure to sort of complete out the global 5G coverage. So what's really interesting is that by leveraging low Earth orbit, what the goal would be is to deliver 5G connectivity to areas that are extreme in nature. And by extreme, we're talking the middle of the ocean, the Amazonian rainforest, and that sort of thing. So this is, from my perspective, super compelling in extending coverage because, the best backhaul that you can use is fiber, but, you do have undersea cables in the oceans, but that's not going to serve as backhaul for mobile 5G. And certainly in places like the Amazon and in these other areas, you're going to have these challenges. So, it'll be interesting to continue to monitor this partnership and the progress there. But you've got three companies that are the best at what they each do coming together, and it could be quite compelling. So what do you think?
I think it's interesting because Thales is definitely one of those companies that they're very much in the satellite business.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people don't know is that Qualcomm, their heritage is actually in satellite. They started as a logistics company, utilizing satellites to figure out the location of trucks. That was their core business before they started doing smartphones.
Yeah.
So I think Qualcomm has a lot of satellite heritage that's kind of buried in their technology. And the three companies working together to improve LEO for 5G, specifically in smartphones, which is a very key point there.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's going to be something that really improves the usefulness of smartphones in general.
Hmm.
And I think that, we could down the road see, smartphones used with satellite as the anchor, because you're much less likely to lose satellite signal than you are anything else.
Right.
And you use satellite to transmit voice and text, like low throughput data, and
Right.
then everything else is just gravy on top of that. And being able to, I mean, I think the biggest challenge for smartphones really with satellite is just satellite acquisition time.
Hmm.
And I think that's really going to be one of the biggest challenges I think you'll see for implementing satellite in smartphones. And I think long term, or at least short term, okay, let's say near term. I was going to say short long term, but that's just near term.
Right.
Um, in near term, I think, or midterm, you'll see that maybe satellite is added as a carrier, and then over time, as it becomes more reliable and power efficient, it could become primary carrier, and then you have essentially uh, internet coverage, but either low throughput or just text and voice anywhere you go in the world, because we already know that voice works over satellite. We've seen
Yeah.
it. There are companies that exist to do that. But I just think that low Earth orbit presents a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
Um, and this could also make doing 5G over 12 gigahertz even less attractive. So
Yeah.
I think this is a really interesting partnership, and I think this will be one of the strongest ones out there long term. And I think we'll see more companies building these kinds of satellite partnerships to um, more tightly integrate the solution to make it shippable.
Yeah. And as I think about it more, it could really open some really interesting sort of go-to-market sort of business opportunities as well, because today the traditional satellite service, to your point, to an end device, it's slow, it takes time to acquire, it's quite expensive. I mean, I have a little spot device that I use when I hike in Colorado, and it's quite expensive, right? And so this, as the partnership matures and platforms mature, there could be some really interesting business models that spin out of this as well. And it also sort of addresses one of my big passion projects, which is figuring out how we're going to bridge the digital divide. And we've talked on prior podcasts about all the different elements that are in play. I mean, LEO is part of it, FWA is part of it. Just overall, investment in fiber and leveraging government subsidies to install fiber in areas that are underserved, where for a traditional deployment, the payback would take decades, right? And it just wouldn't make sense. And so it's going to take more than just writing a checkbook. And so that's what I really love about this particular partnership, is that it could really open up some very interesting new business models. But we'll definitely we'll keep tabs on it and report back as things develop. But let's move to your third and final topic. And you always like to talk about OpenSignal and the rankings. And do you want to provide an update? We saw this come across our desks this week about T-Mobile.
Yeah. So part of the reason why I like these to report on these different speed metrics, whatever you want to call them, is because I think we're going to have a lot of competitiveness over the next year or two in midband, and it's interesting to keep track of where things are in time. But right now, it's very clear that T-Mobile is very much ahead of their competitors. In the OpenSignal report, they said that in terms of 5G download speeds, T-Mobile's now looking at a 171 megabit per second, and that is compared to 53 at AT&T and 72 at Verizon.
Mm-hmm.
So they are more than double, or more than triple their competition, which is considerable and can be almost entirely attributed to their C-band rollout.
Yeah.
and not even that, not even their C-band rollout, their 2.5 gigahertz mid-band rollout, because their C-band they haven't even rolled out yet. So
Yeah, good point.
Their mid-band is extremely strong, and there's going to be another auction coming soon, and that's going to be very interesting to watch because it'll fill in some holes that they have in that network. And then on top of that, their upload speeds were also higher than Verizon or AT&T's, which I think is also contributed to its 2.5 gigahertz band, because their low band spectrum is actually much worse than AT&T and Verizon's in terms of holdings, which is where you find a lot of uplink lives. And then in terms of availability, T-Mobile's network their 5G network was available 40% of the time, compared to AT&T's 18% and Verizon's 10%. So there's still a huge gap in terms of availability of T-Mobile's network compared to their competitors, which I think, if you remember when we started this podcast, I said that T-Mobile would most likely be the leader for the foreseeable future in terms of coverage because of 600 megahertz, and that their competitors like AT&T did stuff like 5GE because they were afraid of this very number difference. And I think long term, T-Mobile's only going to continue to grow that number, as will their competitors. But that 600 megahertz network is just going to be an unbelievable coverage layer that their competitors cannot compete with. And they also there's a 5G reach, which is a category that OpenSignal created, which is a 1 out of 10 point category, and they scored a 7.8 out of 10. I don't really know what the formula is for that, so I don't really contribute it too much. But upload, download, and availability, I think are key metrics that I think are important. And I have to be honest with you, I am seeing T-Mobile's network in more places than I did before, and it's faster. I didn't do this speed test, but someone locally who's also a kind of a tech nerd tweeted out that he saw 1.5 gigabits per second on T-Mobile's midband in San Diego here. So 1.5 gigabits per second on a midband network, no millimeter wave, which is
that's pretty killer. Yeah,
the fastest I've seen is a gig, but it's just I struggle to comprehend that kind of speed on midband, because it just isn't something that we really could think of until now. And as more spectrum becomes available in different bands, I suspect that we could see it go up even higher, and ultimately the average speed will continue to rise as more spectrum becomes available.
I'm not surprised about the coverage piece. You and I spent quite a bit of time with T-Mobile, and Neville Ray in particular, and that has been goal number one from the beginning with their deployment was coverage, and they continue to build upon that. And to your point, Verizon and AT&T and Dish, as they roll out their network, they'll get there and they'll catch up. But the other advantage is just these 2.5 gigahertz assets that T-Mobile brought from the Sprint acquisition, and just really gave them a jump start. And you're right, we've been doing this podcast for over 2 years now, and we can take our victory lap on the fact that we predicted this. We predicted that T-Mobile would be well ahead of all the other tier ones for a good 2.5 plus years. That's coming to fruition, but C-band is ramping pretty quickly, and it'll just be interesting to see. I think it'll be interesting when we're talking again in December to look at the OpenSignal reports of the world and see where everyone's at. But this has been another great podcast. Why don't you take us home, my friend?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide insights on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will's at Welltown Tech, and I'm at Anshel. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.